I knew this guy was going to be a problem the second he cut my chain without asking. Like, not even a pause. Not even that awkward little look people give before they trespass on somebody else's land. He just climbed out of this giant matte black truck covered in sponsor decals, unhooked my gate like he paid the property taxes on it, and drove straight down my gravel road, throwing dust everywhere like he was filming some end-of-the-world survival documentary for YouTube. And the crazy part is, he was smiling while he did it. That kind of smile people get when they've spent too long online hearing strangers tell them they're a genius. See, my place sits way out in the hills outside Ashton Ridge. Little cabin, workshop, couple acres of timber, nothing fancy, but it's mine, and for almost 20 years I've maintained that road myself. Every load of gravel, every drainage ditch, every winter washout, me. Nobody from the county touches it because it's private property. There's literally a steel sign at the entrance that says private road. No trespassing and faded white paint so old the bolts are rusted solid. But apparently none of that mattered to this guy. His name was Caleb Mercer, one of those off-grid lifestyle influencers who make videos about escaping the system while secretly earning six figures from affiliate links and freeze-dried coffee sponsorships. You know the type, beard trimmed too perfectly, always holding an axe he's clearly never sharpened himself, constantly talking about freedom while begging followers to smash the subscribe button. Well, Caleb had just bought the property bordering mine, 15 acres of steep rock and scrub brush nobody wanted because the land was basically useless. Locals called it Widow's Bluff because every guy who bought it ended up broke, divorced, or both. The county had auctioned it off over unpaid taxes 3 different times before Caleb showed up with camera drones and pioneer fantasies. Problem was, his land had no legal access road. None. Completely landlocked. And the only practical path into it was my road. So when I finally caught up to him near the ridge line, I waved him down and said, "Hey, that road's private." Calm voice, no yelling, because I figured maybe this was just some misunderstanding. Caleb leaned out his window wearing mirrored sunglasses like he was auditioning for a truck commercial and goes, "Yeah, I figured we'd work something out, neighbor." Neighbor. I swear people use that word when they're about to ask for something expensive. I told him there wasn't anything to work out. He couldn't use the road, period. His whole expression changed after that. Real subtle, but you could see it happen. The charm switched off and the entitlement switched on. "Come on," he said, laughing a little. "That's literally the only way into my property." And I said, "Sounds like you should have checked that before buying it." Man, he did not like that answer. You ever watch somebody realize money can't automatically solve their problem? That was Caleb standing there in hiking boots clean enough to eat off of. He tried changing tactics after that, started talking about community, cooperation, rural values. All this fake small-town brotherhood nonsense from a guy who moved here 3 days earlier. Then he slipped in the threat real casual, like he thought I wouldn't notice. Would hate for this to turn into some legal headache for both of us. That sentence right there told me exactly who I was dealing with. Not a homesteader. Not a guy chasing peace and simplicity. A guy who believed rules stopped applying the second they became inconvenient to him. So later that afternoon, I installed a heavier chain and a new padlock. 2 days later, certified letter from his attorney sitting in my mailbox. Claimed Caleb was entitled to an easement by necessity and demanded immediate access across my property. I actually laughed when I read it because the land records around here go back forever, and I already knew his parcel had been separated from mine since like the 1890s. Meaning legally, he was screwed. But Caleb didn't care. Guys like that never think they're wrong. They just think reality hasn't caught up to them yet. My attorney sent back a response basically saying, "Nice try." And instead of backing off, Caleb filed a lawsuit anyway. That's when things got ugly online. Because the second he realized the legal system wasn't bending for him, he did what influencers do best. He turned it into content. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is where a lot of people get confused about property law, especially folks who watch too many off-grid freedom videos online and think owning land automatically means you can do whatever you want. From a legal perspective, that's not how this works at all. According to standard procedure, when somebody buys rural property, especially cheap rural property, one of the very first things they're supposed to verify is legal access. Not physical access, legal access. Huge difference. Just because a dirt road exists doesn't mean you have the right to use it. And an easement by necessity isn't some magical Uno reverse card you slap onto your neighbor's land because you failed to do your homework. Courts usually look at whether the two parcels were originally connected at some point, whether access was intentionally removed, stuff like that. Caleb's property had been isolated for over a century, which meant he knowingly bought a landlocked parcel and assumed he could pressure somebody else into solving the problem afterward. And honestly, this happens more than people think. But here's the psychological part that fascinated me. This is a psychological trap influencers fall into all the time. When thousands of strangers online constantly validate you, you start believing inconvenience equals oppression. Caleb genuinely saw himself as the victim because somebody told him no. He wasn't reacting like a businessman who made a bad investment. He was reacting like a celebrity who couldn't believe normal rules still applied to him. And once that mindset kicks in, people stop negotiating in good faith because their ego becomes more important than the actual solution. That's exactly when the whole thing spiraled out of control. So after Caleb filed the lawsuit, he posted this dramatic 10-minute video titled, "Greedy Landowner Tries to Trap US OFF Grid." Yeah, us. Like he was leading settlers across the Oregon Trail instead of fighting over a gravel driveway in northern Idaho. The thumbnail had him standing in front of my gate looking devastated while his girlfriend hugged a German shepherd in the background. Millions of views in 3 days. Comments full of people calling me a tyrant, a boomer, a gatekeeping fascist, which honestly made me laugh because I'm 52 and still split my own firewood. But the creepy part was how many strangers suddenly thought they understood my life because they watched one edited video with cinematic music under it. People online always want a villain, and Caleb was smart enough to package me into one. He never mentioned he bought landlocked property without checking legal access. Never mentioned he drove onto my land without permission. Never mentioned his lawyer already knew the easement claim was weak. Instead, he framed it like some brave, freedom-loving creator was being crushed by a bitter old recluse who hated seeing younger people succeed. And his followers ate it up. I started getting messages every day. Some were just annoying, others crossed the line. "Hope your cabin burns down. People like you are why America is dying." One guy somehow found aerial photos of my property and posted them online with coordinates. That's when I realized this wasn't really about the road anymore. Caleb needed an enemy because outrage was profitable. And if you've ever noticed how internet personalities slowly become more extreme over time, that's why. Rage drives engagement better than honesty ever will. Still, I kept my mouth shut. Didn't respond publicly. Didn't make videos. Didn't argue online. My lawyer told me the best thing you can do with narcissistic personalities is refuse to perform in the theater they build around themselves. So I stayed quiet and let the case move forward. Court day finally comes around and Caleb walks in looking exactly how you'd imagine. Expensive flannel shirt, boots fresh out of the box, carrying himself like the cameras should have been allowed inside. Meanwhile, I had 30 pounds of survey maps, county records, and maintenance receipts sitting on the table. From a legal perspective, facts matter a whole lot more than charisma. Caleb's attorney tried arguing necessity, hardship, community impact, all emotional stuff. But once the judge saw the historical parcel maps, the whole case collapsed fast. There were actually 2 alternative access possibilities to Caleb's property. Expensive? Absolutely. Difficult? Definitely. But possible. And legally, possible is all the court cared about. The judge literally said, "Poor planning does not create involuntary obligations for neighboring property owners." I remember Caleb's face turning bright red when he heard that. Man looked like he wanted to argue with gravity itself. Lawsuit dismissed. Just like that. Should have ended there, right? Nope. Because humiliation does weird things to people with audiences. Caleb doubled down online after losing. Posted another video claiming the system was corrupt, that wealthy landowners manipulate rural courts. All this nonsense designed to keep his followers emotionally invested. He started selling merch too. I'm not kidding. T-shirts that said, "Open the road." Somewhere out there, I guarantee somebody paid $40 to wear a shirt inspired by my driveway dispute. America's a fascinating place. Then came phase 2 of Caleb's master plan. If he couldn't force access through my property, he'd build his own road from the opposite side of the ridge. Now, technically speaking, that route existed. But locals avoided it for a reason. The terrain back there was brutal, steep ravines, unstable rock, seasonal runoff channels. Building a usable road through it would cost a fortune. But once Caleb announced the project online, his ego trapped him. Thousands of followers were cheering him on now. He couldn't back down because his identity depended on being the guy who beat the system. So construction started. Every few days, giant equipment crawled across the hillside, while Caleb filmed motivational drone shots with cinematic music playing over them. "Nobody can stop self-reliance," he said in one clip while standing beside an excavator. I remember watching that and thinking, buddy, nature's about to humble you in ways I can't. Sure enough, 3 months into construction, state environmental inspectors showed up. Turns out the route Caleb's contractors cut through crossed protected wetlands connected to a seasonal watershed, which, for anybody unfamiliar with rural development laws, is a gigantic problem. You can't just bulldoze through environmentally protected areas because you're chasing a frontier aesthetic for YouTube thumbnails. The state issued an immediate stop work order. Fine started at $40,000 and climbed from there. On top of that, Caleb was ordered to fund environmental restoration. Entire sections of the road had to be removed and the damaged wetland rebuilt under supervision. The irony was unbelievable. This guy built an online career preaching preparedness and self-sufficiency, yet somehow never prepared enough to check environmental maps before spending nearly $100,000 cutting a road through protected land. His uploads changed after that. You could hear the stress creeping into his voice. Videos got shorter. Comments became more defensive. Sponsorships quietly disappeared. Turns out brands love rebellious authenticity right up until lawyers and state agencies get involved. Then one rainy Thursday evening, about 6 months after the lawsuit ended, I hear tires crunching outside my cabin. Caleb steps out of this beat-up side-by-side ATV looking exhausted. No camera crew, no drone, no sponsor truck. Just him standing in the rain staring at my porch like a man rehearsing a speech he hated. I opened the door, and before I could say anything he goes, "I need to ask you something." That was the first honest sentence I'd heard from him since we met. He explained the state had restricted all heavy access through the wetland zone until restoration was completed, which meant contractors couldn't reach his property reliably anymore. He needed temporary access for utility work and material deliveries. Through my road, I let him talk for a minute while rain hammered the metal roof overhead. Then he finally says, "I'll pay you $5,000 for 6 months access." $5,000. The same road he claimed he had a moral right to use for free suddenly had a price attached once reality cornered him. Funny how that works. I told him $10,000. Up front. Written contract drafted by my attorney. Any damage to the road paid by him. Strict speed limits. Restricted access hours. And one more thing. Caleb frowned immediately because I think he already knew what was coming. I said, "You make a video telling your audience the truth." Silence. Just rain hitting the porch railing. "Come on," he muttered, rubbing his face. "That'll make me look like an idiot." And I said, "Caleb, you already did that yourself." He looked genuinely angry for a second, but underneath it there was something else too. Embarrassment. Real embarrassment. Not the fake social media kind people monetize. The kind that shows up when your self-image finally collides with reality hard enough to crack. A week later he posted the video. No dramatic music. No manipulative edits. Just him sitting at a workbench explaining that he'd underestimated rural property law, mishandled the dispute, and was now paying for temporary legal access while fixing environmental violations. You could practically feel his audience deflate in real time. Some followers supported him, others turned on him instantly. That's the danger of building your identity around always being right online. Eventually your audience starts expecting perfection from you, and the second reality slips through the cracks, they smell blood. Caleb paid the money, signed the contract, used the road for about 4 months while crews repaired the environmental damage and reworked portions of his access plan. And honestly, he was different after that. Quieter, less performative. The loud confidence disappeared because the universe had finally forced him to experience consequences no amount of editing could hide. Last time I talked to him was maybe a year ago at the feed store in town. He looked older, still working on the property, still over budget, still trying to finish the off-grid dream he sold to millions of strangers before he even understood what it actually required. And that's the part nobody tells you online. Real self-sufficiency isn't aesthetic. It's permits, drainage studies, legal surveys, maintenance costs, liability insurance, erosion control, fuel bills, failed projects, expensive mistakes, all the boring stuff influencers edit out because reality doesn't get clicks. But reality always sends the invoice eventually. You know what's funny about this whole situation? People online still occasionally message me asking why I wouldn't just help the guy out. And honestly, I probably would have, if Caleb had approached me like a normal human being from the start. That's the part a lot of people miss. This was never really about a road. It was about entitlement. It was about somebody deciding my property stopped being mine the second it became useful to them. And once somebody crosses that line, especially out in rural communities where land ownership means everything, trust disappears real fast. The lesson here is boundaries matter more than charm. Doesn't matter how many followers somebody has, how inspiring their branding looks, or how many buzzwords they throw around about freedom and community. If they can't respect a simple no, eventually life is going to humble them, usually expensively. And I think there's also a bigger psychological thing happening nowadays where people confuse visibility with authority. Caleb spent so much time performing competence online that he stopped questioning his own decisions in real life. That's dangerous, because algorithms reward confidence, not accuracy. The internet will cheer for a guy bulldozing into disaster right up until the fines arrive. Then suddenly everybody acts shocked. From a legal perspective, this story's actually pretty straightforward. Property rights are property rights. Buying land without legal access is the buyer's responsibility, not the neighbor's emergency. According to standard procedure, due diligence exists for a reason. Surveys matter. Easements matter. Environmental regulations matter. And ignoring those things because you're emotionally attached to a dream doesn't magically exempt you from consequences. But honestly, the human side interests me more than the legal side. Because after all the lawsuits, videos, outrage, and ego battles, the strangest part was seeing how much calmer Caleb became once he finally stopped trying to win. The second he accepted reality instead of fighting it, his life actually started improving. Slower, sure. More expensive than he imagined, absolutely. But real. And maybe that's the takeaway nobody wants to hear anymore. Real life moves slower than internet fantasy. Real freedom costs more than a merch store can cover. And real independence starts with taking responsibility for your own mistakes instead of turning your neighbors into villains. Anyway, that's my story. I'm curious what you guys think. If somebody buys landlocked property, should neighbors help them out anyway? Or is that completely on the buyer? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about property disputes, legal drama, bad decisions, and expensive life lessons, stick around, because trust me, rural America is full of them.